The flight that changed everything. The cabin of Flight 732 was alive with the usual pre-departure chaos. Passengers shuffling down the narrow aisle, the rustling of luggage being hoisted into overhead compartments, the clipped voices of travelers eager to settle in. Flight attendant Kara Evans stood near the entrance of the aircraft, her navy blue uniform crisp, her blonde hair twisted into a flawless bun. She exuded quiet authority, her sharp blue eyes scanning every movement like a hawk, ensuring order was maintained. Kara had spent years perfecting her craft. No nonsense, no disruptions, and certainly no delays. This was how she ran things. The rules were clear, and she took pride in enforcing them with precision. To her, efficiency was the highest form of professionalism. As she swept her gaze across the boarding passengers, she noticed a woman, a heavily pregnant woman, struggling down the aisle, her face tight with exhaustion. She gripped the handle of her small carry-on, her movements slow, deliberate, as though each step was a battle. Mia Carter, as the name on her boarding pass would later reveal, was wearing comfortable maternity clothes, her belly prominent as she tried to maneuver through the tight space. Kara's irritation flickered. The woman was clearly moving slower than the rest, holding up the line. Some people always thought they deserved special treatment. Sighing, she folded her arms, watching as Mia stopped at seat 14C, a window seat in business class. The woman carefully lowered herself into the chair, pressing a hand against her stomach as she exhaled deeply. Kara stepped forward, her polite but firm smile in place. "Ma'am, I believe you're in the wrong seat." Mia glanced up, dark eyes momentarily confused. "Oh, I just needed a second," she murmured, her voice edged with exhaustion. "I'll move in a minute." Kara's smile tightened. She didn't have time for this. "I need you to move now. We have a schedule to keep." Mia shifted uncomfortably. I've been on my feet all day. I needed a second before." Kara didn't let her finish. "This is business class, ma'am. You need to be in your assigned seat." The woman's face flushed, and several passengers nearby started watching the interaction. "I am in business class," Maya said slowly, glancing at her ticket. "I'm in 16A, just a couple of rows back. I was just catching my breath before moving." Kara folded her arms, her irritation growing. Another entitled passenger. "You can catch your breath in your assigned seat, ma'am. This isn't a waiting lounge." Mia blinked, as if stunned by the coldness in Kara's tone. With effort, she reached for the armrest, struggling to push herself up. That was when another voice interrupted. "Is there a problem here?" A man in a crisp suit seated nearby had spoken, his brows furrowed. Kara turned to him with a carefully neutral expression. "Not at all. This passenger is simply moving to her correct seat." The man looked at Mia, then back at Kara, his lips pressing into a thin line. She just sat down for a moment. "You could show a little patience." Kara's jaw clenched. "Sir, I assure you, I'm following protocol." "Protocol?" The man scoffed. "She's pregnant, not a security threat." Kara ignored him, refocusing on Mia, who was now standing, gripping the armrest for balance. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience," Mia murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. But her fingers trembled as she adjusted her bag, her exhaustion painfully evident. Kara nodded briskly, satisfied. "Thank you for your cooperation." She turned to return to the front of the plane when Maya's voice stopped her. "You didn't have to talk to me like that." Kara paused, turning back to see Mia standing in the aisle, her dark eyes holding something unreadable. Anger, exhaustion, maybe even hurt. "I said I was moving," Mia continued, her voice shaking slightly. "I was never planning to stay in that seat. I just needed a second to." She shook her head, pressing her lips together. "Never mind." Kara exhaled sharply. "Ma'am, I didn't talk to you like that. I simply asked you to follow the seating arrangements." Mia let out a small, humorless laugh. "Right. Of course." Kara narrowed her eyes. Is there an issue? Mia opened her mouth as if to say something, then stopped herself. Instead, she simply exhaled, slung her bag over her shoulder, and took slow, measured steps toward 16A. Kara turned back to the front of the plane, already dismissing the interaction from her mind. But the murmurs among the passengers hadn't died down. That was uncalled for, someone muttered. She could have handled that better, another voice whispered. Kara stiffened but didn't turn around. Let them talk. She had a job to do. What she didn't know was that a passenger in 17B had recorded the entire exchange on their phone. What she didn't know was that, by the time the flight landed, the video would already be circulating on social media. And what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that within hours, her life would never be the same again. The viral storm and the unraveling. Kara Evans always prided herself on her composure. She was the kind of person who never lost control, not in the air, not on the ground, not even in moments of confrontation. That's what made her such a good flight attendant. She followed the rules. She ensured order. She kept things running smoothly. But as she walked through the terminal after landing, something felt off. She was used to passengers glancing at her uniform. It came with the job. But today, the stares lingered just a little too long. Some whispered as she passed. A young man in a hoodie pulled out his phone and smirked as he walked by, thumbs tapping rapidly against the screen. A cold prickle ran down her spine. She ignored it. It had been a long flight, and people were always eager to find something to gossip about. Probably some celebrity was on board, and she hadn't even noticed. She pulled out her phone to check her messages. One missed call. David. Text from Colleen. Co-worker. Kara, have you seen Twitter? Call me now. Her stomach twisted. Twitter. Why would she need to check Twitter? A sinking feeling settled into her gut. Her pulse picked up as she clicked on the link Colleen had sent. The video loaded instantly. Her own voice, sharp, clipped, impatient, filled her ears. There she was, standing in the aisle, arms crossed, face indifferent. The pregnant woman, Mia, sat hunched over in the window seat, exhaustion on her face as she tried to explain herself. The camera had zoomed in on her face when Kara snapped, "This isn't a waiting lounge." The caption at the top of the post burned into her vision. Flight Attendant Humiliates, Heartwarming woman. Wo atch, how is she etalks to here? Disgusting. She scrolled. 200,000 views. 350,000 views, 470,000 views. It wasn't stopping. Kara's breath hitched. She scrolled through the replies, her hands trembling. At Maria Henderson 88. This is so cruel. That woman is pregnant. How do people lack this much empathy? At Justice Formia. We need to find out who this flight attendant is. She should be fired. At Darren Willis. This is what happens when people get a little power and forget basic human decency. Her fingers hovered over the screen as a verified account retweeted the video. Her blood went ice cold. At Maya Carter Official. No woman, pregnant or not, deserves to be spoken to this way. This is why we must continue fighting for respect and dignity in all spaces. Disappointed, but not surprised. Kara felt like she'd been slapped. Mia Carter wasn't just another passenger. She was an influential entrepreneur, a philanthropist, a voice that mattered. And worst of all, she was a friend of David's. The fallout begins. Kara barely remembered the Uber ride home. By the time she walked through the door of her sleek, perfectly arranged San Francisco townhouse, David was already waiting. His arms were crossed. His face was tight. He had seen it. She didn't even have the chance to explain before he let out a dry, humorless laugh. So, you've seen it then. Kara tossed her bag onto the counter, rubbing her temples. David, this is being blown out of proportion. You don't know the full story. David exhaled sharply, shaking his head. I don't need the full story. I just watched my wife humiliate Mia Carter in front of a plane full of people, and now it's all over the internet." She stiffened. "I wasn't humiliating her, David. I was doing my job. She was in the wrong seat." David stared at her like he didn't recognize her. "Are you serious right now?" Kara's jaw clenched. "Yes, I enforce the rules. That's my job." David's voice was quiet, but filled with disbelief. "Kara, do you even hear yourself?" Something sharp twisted in her chest. "Oh, come on. People are overreacting. This will pass." David let out a dry, disbelieving laugh. "Will it? Because in the last 4 hours, Mia has received thousands of messages of support. And you're the face of everything people hate about authority." Kara felt her pulse spike. "David, I didn't know who she was when I spoke to her. It was just a moment." David's expression darkened. "That's the problem, isn't it? If you had recognized her, you would have treated her differently. So what does that say about you?" Silence stretched between them. Kara swallowed, her throat dry. "David, what are you saying?" David ran a hand through his hair, looking exhausted. "I need some time to think." Her stomach dropped. "Think about what?" David hesitated. "About us." The words hit her harder than she expected. "Are you seriously saying you're considering leaving me over this?" David's eyes softened slightly, but his jaw remained clenched. I need space." Then he grabbed his keys and walked out the door. The consequences. The next morning, Kara received an email from Pacific Airways HR. Subject: Urgent meeting regarding con du CT on Flight 732. Her hands trembled as she read it. She was being formally investigated. For the first time, real fear settled into her bones. This wasn't just a bad moment. This wasn't just an embarrassing video. This was a public takedown. And Kara Evans, the composed, efficient, respected flight attendant, was about to lose everything. The fall and the reckoning. Kara Evans had always believed she was in control. Her career, her reputation, even her marriage. Everything in her life had been carefully structured, a perfect reflection of order and discipline. But now she was watching it all crumble in real time. She sat in the waiting area of Pacific Airways headquarters, staring at the minimalist white walls, the framed photographs of pristine airplanes soaring through blue skies. She had been here before, just not like this. Kara had walked into this building for promotions, commendations, performance reviews that praised her efficiency. Today, she was here for an investigation. The receptionist had given her a wary glance when she checked in. A glance that told Kara everything. They had seen the video. The murmurs in the office hallways, the darting looks from other employees. It was humiliating. The door opened, and a woman in a gray blazer stepped into the room. "Ms. Evans, HR is ready for you." Kara rose slowly, smoothing down her uniform. She wasn't going to fall apart. She wasn't going to show weakness. But as she stepped into the conference room and saw the 3 HR officials seated behind the long table, something in her chest twisted. This was real. They weren't looking at her as an employee. They were looking at her like she was already fired. The meeting that sealed her fate. The head of the HR panel, Margaret Ellis, a woman in her late 50s with steel gray hair and sharp brown eyes, didn't waste time. "Ms. Evans, I assume you're aware of the social media backlash regarding your conduct on Flight 732. Kara nodded. "Yes." Margaret exhaled. "We've conducted a thorough review of the incident. Passengers, including Ms. Carter herself, have submitted complaints. The airline has also been inundated with negative publicity, petitions calling for action, and threats of boycotts. This situation is serious." Kara fought the urge to defend herself. The words burned on her tongue. "I was just doing my job." She was in the wrong seat. People are overreacting. But she knew those excuses wouldn't matter. Margaret studied her. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Kara inhaled. This was her moment to fight for her career. She sat up straighter. "I regret that the situation escalated the way it did. However, I was following the airline's procedures." Margaret held up a hand. "Ms. Evans, let's be clear. This is not just about one incident." A cold chill spread through Kara's veins. Margaret pulled out a file and flipped it open. "Over the past 5 years, we've received multiple complaints from passengers about your rigid enforcement of rules, your lack of patience, and dismissive interactions." Kara's stomach twisted. She had never been disciplined, never even warned. So why was this coming up now? Margaret continued. "The viral nature of this incident has prompted former passengers to share their experiences. Several have described you as condescending, unapproachable, and overly strict." Kara's nails dug into her palm. Margaret cut her off. "Ms. Evans, our airline prides itself on both efficiency and hospitality. And unfortunately, you've become a liability." The finality in her tone sent ice down Kara's spine. "Effective immediately, your employment with Pacific Airways is terminated." It was like the world tilted. She had imagined suspension, maybe a chance to repair her image. But this? She had been a flight attendant for 10 years. Her entire life revolved around this career. And now, it was gone. Kara sat frozen as Margaret slid a formal letter across the table. "This outlines your severance package. We will ask you to return your uniform and company-issued materials by the end of the week." Kara barely processed the rest. She left the building in a daze, stepping out into the San Francisco streets as the realization crashed down on her. She was unemployed. She was disgraced. And she had no idea what to do next. The silence at home. By the time Kara got home, she felt hollow. She dropped her bag by the door, staring at the quiet, untouched space of her townhouse. David wasn't home. Her phone was silent. No messages. Even her so-called friends in the airline industry had gone radio silent. She knew what that meant. She had become untouchable. Kara sat at the kitchen table, the termination letter still in her hands, reading the words over and over as if they would change. But they wouldn't. She had spent years climbing the ranks, believing she was good at her job, believing she was respected. Now she was nothing more than a villain in a viral video, a symbol of arrogance, a cautionary tale. She felt something rise in her throat. Rage, grief, denial. She wanted to scream. But there was no one to hear her. A face from the past. 3 days passed. Kara barely left the house. She ignored the messages from reporters looking for a comment. She ignored the messages from strangers sending her insults. She kept waiting for David to call. But he never did. Then, on the 4th day, her doorbell rang. Kara hesitated. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, her breath hitched. Mia Carter stood on her doorstep. Kara's heart stopped. Mia's arms were crossed, her expression unreadable. "Can I come in?" Kara stepped aside, confused, wary. Mia entered, glancing around at the pristine modern space before turning back to face Kara. "I heard you lost your job." Kara swallowed hard. "I guess you got what you wanted." Mia tilted her head. "Did I?" The words caught Kara off guard. Mia exhaled. "Look, I didn't come here to gloat. I came here because David asked me to." Kara's breath hitched. David. He was still talking to Mia. Mia studied her. "I'm going to give you a choice, Kara." Kara frowned. "What kind of choice?" Mia's expression didn't change. "You can stay here in this house, feeling sorry for yourself, blaming everyone but yourself, waiting for the world to forget." She took a step closer. "Or, you can get up, do the work, and prove you're more than the woman in that video." Kara's stomach twisted. "What does that mean?" Mia sighed. "I run a mentorship initiative. Women trying to break into industries where they've been overlooked. People who have been dismissed." Kara blinked. "And what does that have to do with me?" Mia's lips curled into something almost amused. You know exactly what it has to do with you. Kara felt trapped. This wasn't a punishment. This was a test. Mia shrugged. The program starts tomorrow morning. The choice is yours. Then she walked toward the door. Kara called after her. Wait. Mia turned. Yes. Kara's throat was dry. She had a choice. She could run, or she could face the truth. After a long silence, Kara inhaled shakily. What time does it start? Mia's lips twitched. 8 a.m. Don't be late. The choice that changed everything. Kara Evans had never been the type of person who accepted defeat. She was raised to believe that if you worked hard enough, followed the rules, and did everything right, success would follow. That was how she had climbed her way through Pacific Airways, how she had built her life with David, how she had convinced herself that she was always in the right. But now, none of that mattered. She had followed the rules and still lost her job. She had done everything right and still lost David. She had believed herself untouchable and still became the villain of a viral scandal. And now, Mia Carter, the woman whose face had haunted her for days, stood in her living room, offering her a chance. Kara wanted to reject it. She wanted to tell Mia to get out, to tell her that she didn't need anyone's help. But she couldn't. Because the truth was, she had no idea what came next. Mia's dark eyes held no pity, no smugness, no satisfaction. Just something Kara couldn't quite understand. A test. Kara exhaled sharply. You really expect me to just show up to some mentorship program after everything that's happened? Mia shrugged. That's up to you. Kara narrowed her eyes. I'm not looking for some charity handout. Mia laughed at that. A short, sharp sound. Trust me, Kara. This isn't charity. This is work. She turned toward the door, but paused, glancing back. 8 a.m. If you're not there, I'll assume you'd rather sit here in self-pity. Then, without another word, Mia walked out, and Kara was left alone with her choice. The longest night. Kara didn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning in endless circles. Everything had happened so fast. A week ago, she was a respected flight attendant with a stable job, a stable marriage, a stable life. Now, she had nothing. She reached for her phone, scrolling through Twitter again, searching her own name. She shouldn't have done it, but she couldn't stop herself. The video had crossed over 1.5 million views. The comments were endless. Some still called for her to be permanently blacklisted from the airline industry. Others just mocked her. A few, just a few, wondered if she deserved a second chance. But none of that mattered, because David still hadn't called. And that silence told her everything she needed to know. She had lost him. Kara squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her palms into her face. She wanted to blame Mia. She wanted to blame the passengers who had filmed her. She wanted to blame the internet, the media, the airline. But as the night dragged on, she had to face the truth. She had done this to herself. And now, she had to decide whether to do something about it. A step toward the unknown. At 7:45 a.m., Kara Evans stood outside the downtown community center, gripping the strap of her handbag so tightly that her fingers ached. She still didn't know why she was here. She could have stayed home. She could have ignored Mia's offer. She could have let the world move on without her. But instead, she had dragged herself out of bed, forced herself into clothes that weren't her airline uniform, and taken the longest Uber ride of her life. She stared at the glass doors, her heart hammering. What if they recognize me? She could already hear the whispers, the gasps, the judgment. Her fingers hovered over the door handle. She could still turn back. She could still run. But then she heard a voice behind her. Are you just going to stand there all day, or are you coming in? Kara turned sharply. Maya stood a few feet away, arms crossed, eyebrow raised. Kara swallowed hard, forcing herself to straighten. "I was just thinking." Mia smirked. "Yeah? Well, think faster. You're late." Then she walked past Kara and into the building. Kara hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, she followed, facing the room. The room was filled with dozens of women, entrepreneurs, young professionals, people who had fought for every inch of progress in their careers. Kara immediately felt out of place. She wasn't like them. She wasn't here to build a startup, or to break barriers, or to prove herself in an industry that refused to see her. She was just here because she had nowhere else to go. Mia walked to the front of the room, speaking with a small group. She didn't acknowledge Kara, didn't introduce her, didn't tell everyone who she was. That, in itself, was a gift. Kara sank into a seat near the back, keeping her head low. She listened as the first session began. The topic: unconscious bias in the workplace. Kara sat frozen as women shared stories of being ignored, dismissed, undervalued. Stories that sounded eerily familiar, because she had been on the other side of them. She had been the person dismissing people like them. And for the first time, she didn't have an excuse. She didn't justify her past actions. She just listened. And it hurt. After the session, Kara stayed in her seat long after the session ended, staring at the table. Her mind was a mess. She felt exposed, like someone had taken her entire life, flipped it upside down, and forced her to look at it from the outside. Footsteps approached. Mia sat down across from her, folding her arms. "You stayed." Kara swallowed hard. "Yeah." Mia tilted her head. "Why?" Kara hesitated. Because she didn't want to be the person in that video anymore. Because she was tired of running. Because she had no idea what else to do. Instead, she said, "Because I needed to." Mia studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. Just once. And somehow, that felt more real than any apology Kara could have given. The road to redemption. Kara Evans had spent years believing she had nothing to learn. She had built her life around control, order, and authority. Rules were meant to be followed. Emotions had no place in efficiency, and weakness was a liability. But now, sitting in a room full of women who had spent their lives fighting to be seen, she felt something she had never experienced before. Shame. It settled deep in her bones, heavier than the loss of her job, heavier than the silence from David, heavier than the online humiliation she had faced over the past week. This was different. Because for the first time, she saw herself for what she truly was. Not just the woman from the video, but the woman who had spent years dismissing others, assuming the worst, treating people like inconveniences instead of human beings. The realization burned, and for the first time in her life, she didn't know how to fix it. A tense welcome. The next day, Kara returned to the mentorship program. The moment she stepped inside, she could feel the eyes on her. People whispered. They knew who she was. Of course they did. A woman at the coffee station leaned into her friend, murmuring something while shooting Kara a pointed look. Kara's first instinct was to walk out. She didn't belong here. She didn't deserve to be here. But then, across the room, Mia Carter met her gaze. There was no warmth in her expression. No reassurance. Just a silent challenge. Kara inhaled, squared her shoulders, and forced herself to stay. She took a seat near the back again, avoiding eye contact, listening as the session began. Today's topic: the power of self-awareness. Kara almost laughed at the irony. A hard conversation. At the end of the session, Kara didn't get up immediately. She was still processing, still trying to make sense of everything. But she didn't get the luxury of staying invisible. A woman sat down beside her. Dark curls, strong posture, unapologetic energy. "I'm Layla." The woman extended a hand. Kara hesitated before shaking it. "Kara." Layla smirked. "Yeah, I know." Kara's stomach twisted. "Here it comes." Layla leaned back in her chair. "Let me guess. You didn't expect people to recognize you. Kara sighed. No, I knew. She hesitated. I don't know why I'm here. Layla's brow lifted. Mia forced you. Kara hesitated. Not exactly. Layla crossed her arms. Then why are you here, Kara? Because from what I saw in that video, you're the last person who should be in a room full of women who've been overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed their whole lives. Kara flinched. Because Layla was right. But instead of getting defensive, Kara did something she had never done before. She listened. Layla studied her. Look, I don't know you. But I know women like you. Women who don't realize they're the problem. You think you're just enforcing rules, doing your job, keeping things in order. Her eyes darkened. But what you're really doing is making people like me feel like we don't belong. Kara swallowed hard. She could have denied it. She could have fought back. She could have justified herself. But she didn't. Because the truth was, Layla was right. Kara's voice was hoarse when she finally spoke. I don't know how to fix this. Layla tilted her head. Then start by listening. She stood up, adjusting her bag. If you come back tomorrow, maybe I'll believe you actually give a damn. Then, just like that, she walked away. Kara sat frozen, staring at the empty chair beside her. A call that changes everything. That night, Kara sat on her couch, staring at her phone. She had drafted at least 10 messages to David, but she hadn't sent any of them. She didn't even know what to say. But then, just as she was about to put the phone down, it rang. Kara's breath hitched. David. She scrambled to answer, her fingers shaking. David. A long silence. Then, his voice. Kara. Her throat tightened. I saw that you went to the mentorship program. She stilled. David knew. Mia must have told him. Kara exhaled slowly. Yeah. Another pause. Why? Kara let out a bitter laugh. I don't know. David's voice was quieter now. Yes, you do. She closed her eyes. Because I need to be better. David didn't respond right away. And for the first time in weeks, Kara didn't rush to fill the silence. She just let it sit. Finally, David exhaled. I don't know what this means for us, Kara. Her heart ached. She had wanted him to say he was coming home. She had wanted him to say he forgave her. But he didn't, because she hadn't earned that yet. And maybe that was okay. For now, David cleared his throat. But if you're serious about changing, then keep doing the work. And maybe someday we'll figure it out. Kara felt something inside her shift. For the first time since everything fell apart. She had hope. The beginning of something new. The next morning, Kara arrived at the mentorship program early. Not because she had to. Not because she was proving anything to Mia. But because for the first time in her life, she wanted to listen. She found Layla near the coffee station. The other woman raised a brow. You came back. Kara took a deep breath. Yeah. Layla studied her for a moment. Then she nodded. All right then. Let's see if you mean it. And just like that, Kara's journey truly began. The breaking point and the awakening. Kara Evans had never been the type to start over. Her life had been built on stability. A career that gave her purpose, a marriage that gave her balance, and a sense of authority that gave her control. But now, she was learning that control was just an illusion. It had taken losing everything, her job, her reputation, and possibly her husband, for her to understand what she had been blind to all along. Now, every morning, she walked into the mentorship program, sitting among women she would have once dismissed, listening to stories she would have once ignored. And the hardest part, realizing they weren't just talking about the world. They were talking about people like her, confronting the past. One afternoon, as the session ended, Mia Carter walked over to Kara's table. Kara had learned not to expect kindness from her. Mia had never gone out of her way to make her feel comfortable, never patted her on the back for showing up. And somehow, that made Kara respect her more. Mia pulled out a chair and sat. "Walk with me." Kara hesitated but nodded, standing and following Mia out of the room, through the quiet halls of the community center. Maya stopped near a row of windows, arms crossed. "You've been here for a month." Kara exhaled. "I know." Mia tilted her head. And Kara's stomach twisted. She knew what Mia was really asking. What had she learned? What had she realized? Kara's voice was quieter than she expected when she answered. "That I never saw people. Not really." Mia studied her. Kara forced herself to continue. "I thought I was just following the rules. But I wasn't. I was treating people like they didn't matter just because they made things inconvenient for me." She swallowed hard. "And I don't know how to fix it." Mia's expression didn't soften. "You don't fix something like this, Kara. You just do better." Kara felt something inside her crack open. She had spent her whole life fixing things. She had believed that problems had solutions, that a single apology, a single act, could erase everything. But that wasn't how this worked. Mia exhaled. "Come with me. There's someone I want you to meet." Kara hesitated. "Who?" Mia didn't answer. She just started walking. And Kara, with her heart pounding in her chest, followed. The unexpected meeting. Mia led Kara into a small office at the back of the center. Inside, a woman sat at a desk, typing on a laptop. She looked up when they entered, her eyes immediately narrowing when she saw Kara. Kara's breath caught. She knew that face. She had dismissed that face before. Layla, the woman who had confronted her weeks ago. Layla leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "So, what's this about?" Mia sat on the edge of the desk. "I think you two need to have a real conversation." Kara stiffened. "We already." Mia held up a hand. "No, you haven't." Layla's gaze was sharp. "What's there to talk about?" "I already told you. People like her don't change." The words stung, but Kara didn't flinch, because Layla had every right to doubt her. Mia exhaled. "That's what we're here to figure out." Kara forced herself to speak. "What did I do to you?" Layla's expression darkened. "You really don't remember." Kara's throat tightened. She had spent the past few weeks re-examining her past, looking for the moments where she had been cruel, dismissive, condescending. There were too many. Layla exhaled sharply. 5 years ago. Flight 282. A red-eye to Chicago. Kara felt the blood drain from her face. She knew this story. Layla's voice was cold. "I was traveling for a job interview. First time flying business class. I was nervous, but I was excited. And then you came down the aisle." Kara's pulse pounded in her ears. She remembered now. Layla's fingers curled into fists. "My carry-on was an inch too big, just barely. You didn't even give me a chance to adjust it. You just made me check it." Kara swallowed. Layla's voice was tight with anger. "You told me rules are rules." Mia leaned back, watching them both. Kara spoke, her voice hoarse. "And that bag had something important in it, didn't it?" Layla's lips pressed into a thin line. "Yeah, my portfolio. My work. Everything I needed to prove I was good enough for that job." Kara felt sick. She could hear her own voice from the past. Cold. Unbothered. Rules are rules. Layla's eyes burned. "You didn't listen. You didn't care. And when I begged you to let me pull out my files, you just walked away." Silence. Kara's throat felt tight. "Did you?" Layla gave a bitter laugh. "Did I get the job?" She shook her head. "I never even made it to the interview. My flight was delayed. And by the time my luggage was delivered, I had missed my chance." Kara's breath shook. Layla stood. "You cost me that opportunity, Kara. And you never even looked back." Mia was silent. She wasn't here to protect Kara. She wasn't here to make things easier. This was Kara's moment. Kara exhaled slowly. This was where the old her would have defended herself. This was where she would have made excuses, tried to explain, tried to say it wasn't her fault. But she didn't. Instead, she faced it. "I'm sorry, Layla." Layla's expression didn't change. "No, you're not. You just don't want to feel guilty." Kara shook her head. "No, I'm sorry because I didn't care. Because I never stopped to think about how I affected people." Her voice wavered. "And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I needed to hear this. I needed to know." Silence stretched between them. Layla exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. "We'll see if you mean that, Kara." Then she turned, leaving Kara alone with Mia. Mia studied her. "Well," she asked, "are you going to quit now?" Kara's answer was immediate. "No." Mia smirked. For the first time, Kara felt like she had taken a real step forward. The redemption and the reckoning. For weeks, Kara Evans had been unlearning everything she once believed to be true. She had spent years living in a world that made sense to her, where rules were rules, where control meant success, and where people who struggled were just not trying hard enough. But now she was beginning to understand that her world had been built on blinders. And those blinders had hurt people. She had never truly seen them. Not Layla. Not Mia. Not even the passengers she had dismissed without a second thought. Now, for the first time in her life, she was looking at herself in the mirror and seeing what everyone else had seen all along. And it was time to do something about it, rebuilding trust the hard way. A week after her confrontation with Layla, Kara returned to the mentorship program early. Not just to listen, but to help. She had noticed something over the past few weeks, small things. People always seemed a little too aware of her presence. Some kept their distance. Others were polite, but not welcoming. Layla hadn't spoken to her since their conversation in the office, and Kara didn't blame her. She had learned that trust isn't given. It's earned. And the only way to earn it: show up, do the work, expect nothing in return. That morning, instead of just finding a seat, Kara found a volunteer coordinator and asked how she could help. The woman, an older mentor named Diane, raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" Kara nodded. "Yes." Diane studied her, then handed her a clipboard. "Fine. You're on registration duty today. Check people in. Help set up. No complaints." Kara took the clipboard without hesitation. Got it. And for the first time in her life, Kara Evans did something without expecting a reward. A test of character. That afternoon, Kara was setting up chairs when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Didn't expect to see you still here." She turned to see Layla, arms crossed, watching her carefully. Kara exhaled. "I meant what I said, Layla." Layla raised an eyebrow. "Which part? The part where you're sorry, or the part where you actually change?" Kara didn't react to the hostility. She had earned it. She straightened. "Both." Layla tilted her head. "Then prove it." Kara frowned. "How?" Layla smirked. "I have an event next week. A leadership seminar for women in business. You want to prove you're serious. Come with me. Help out. Learn something." Kara hesitated. A month ago, she would have dismissed something like that. She wasn't a businesswoman. But now, she was a woman starting over. She met Layla's gaze. "Okay." Layla studied her for a long moment, then nodded. For the first time, there was a crack in her walls. Maybe, just maybe, Kara was starting to earn her trust. The leadership seminar. The following week, Kara found herself standing in a conference room full of women who were exactly the kind of people she had once dismissed. Entrepreneurs, CEOs, women who had been told no 1,000 times and still kept going. Kara wasn't sure what she was doing there. She wasn't an entrepreneur. She wasn't a business leader. But she listened. She watched the way Layla commanded the room, her confidence, her ability to uplift and inspire. She saw how women supported one another, lifting each other up instead of tearing each other down. And for the first time, Kara understood. This wasn't about power. It was about people. She had spent her entire career enforcing authority without compassion, and now she was beginning to see the cost of that. At the end of the event, Layla walked up to her. "So," Kara exhaled. "I get it now." Layla smirked. "Do you?" Kara nodded. "Yeah, and I want to help." Layla studied her. "All right then. Let's see if you mean that." And just like that, Kara had found her next step. Not a job, not a title, but a purpose. Facing David. 1 month after losing everything, Kara stood outside her house, staring at the front door. David had never called her back. Not since their last conversation. But she was done waiting. She needed to face him. Taking a deep breath, she knocked. The door opened a few moments later, and there he was. David. His expression was unreadable. Kara. Her heart pounded. She had prepared for this moment. But now that she was here, she didn't know what to say. Finally, she spoke. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect us to go back to what we were." David watched her, silent. Kara swallowed hard. "But I needed to tell you that I finally understand what I did wrong." A flicker of something crossed his face. Kara exhaled. "I spent my whole life thinking I was doing everything right, but I never saw the people I hurt along the way." David tilted his head. "And now?" Kara gave a small, tired smile. "Now, I see them." For the first time in weeks, David truly looked at her, and something shifted. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a start. And for now, that was enough. 1 year later, Kara Evans never went back to being a flight attendant. She never reapplied for the job. She never fought to get her old life back. Instead, she built a new one. She spent months working with Layla's organization, helping young women navigate industries that had once shut them out. She spoke at events, not as a success story, but as a cautionary tale. She told the truth about who she had been. And slowly, people started to listen. She and David never fully went back to the way things were, but they found a new balance. One based on honesty, one based on growth, one based on understanding. And for the first time in her life, Kara Evans wasn't running anymore. She was finally facing herself. And that was the real redemption.